Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. I've always wanted to say that one. It's just a great one. Thanks to the Magic Historian, that one has been a great one for many years. But I've always wanted to say it, and I think it's a great introduction. But anyway, today we're having a quick discussion about why the Flibble Flip do some players run mana rocks when you're playing green. And this is one of the biggest mistakes I think a lot of people make, and I just do not understand why some people that are playing green are playing mana rocks. I mean, it just boggles my mind. There are literally like one, maybe two decks that actually have green in them that actively care about artifacts. So unless you're playing one of those like two very fringe decks, I just don't see that you should be playing mana rocks. You can play mana dorks. You can play your Llanowar elves and your or whatever, all these different basically the same Llanowar elves. Like that, and you can play your Farseeks and your Kadama's Reaches and things like this, and you just got so many other options. You can play Wood Elves and things like this that actually fetch lands out of your deck to give you more lands and more ramps. So I just don't really understand the value to some people. I understand if you put Soul Ring in, yeah, sure, Soul Ring, that's fine. I'm not going to complain to say someone has a Soul Ring in the deck, but when I see someone with an Arcane Signet in their deck, it's kind of like, well, why is that in there? It doesn't make any sense. You're in green. You've got access to so much other and better ramp options. You don't need this card. Like Golgari, not Golgari Charm, what's it called? Golgari Signet, or things like that. Selesnya Signet, Gruul Signet, these things. Why are people running these cards? I cannot fathom it. So we're going to have a bit of a discussion about it, I guess, and just say, well, what other options? And I sort of have listed a few other options as I've just been talking. But there are literally millions and millions of other options out there that you can choose from in green that will basically give you what you need. Now, in multiple color decks, I think it's a little bit harder sometimes. But there are other options. So one of the cards that I think is like the biggest card that's come out in the last few years is one from Theros Beyond Death, Dryad of the Elysian Groves, which is basically a better Chromatic Lantern, mostly. So it's a 3-mana creature, 2/4, and it allows you to play an additional land on each of your turns, and all of your lands are every basic land type in addition to their other types. So basically this means that every single one of your lands is now able to tap of mana of any color pretty much. So that's when I see someone using Chromatic Lantern, I'm just like, well, why not run Dryad of the Elysian Grove? Because basically it would do the same thing. It would let you play additional lands as well if you happen to have them. And if you don't happen to have them, there are still ways that you can draw more lands and be able to play more lands each turn more easily, I believe. And once again, the main reason why I'll say about mana dorks or things that let you play additional lands or things that get you additional lands into play is much, much safer than mana rocks. There are all sorts of things, of course, yes, there are all sorts of things that will blow up creatures as well, but if a creature has given you a land, more or less, then that's been worth it because it has ramped you. It has done what it is set out to do in your deck. And if it has fixed you, then it has also done what is set out to do in your deck. Because most of the ramp cards are also your fixing cards. So if you are missing white, or you're missing black, or you're missing red, or you're missing blue, or whatever you're missing, you can go and find that card that you need, or you can turn your lands into being able to produce the mana of that color. So I just think that some people have, perhaps bought their precon deck again and gone, okay, I'm just going to play this as it is. They don't take a second thought about it. And there's also just like that whole barrage out there to a degree. Like if you're in Gruul, there is such a thing as a Gruul signet and so on and so forth. There are all these mana rocks, they do exist. And of course you can play them. And it's sort of like, well, what's the problem with playing them? But again, like to a degree, if you say, oh, well, it ramped me as it was and therefore it did its job, well, yes, did to a degree, but then it got blown up. If you got a land, then you're not going to probably lose that land. Or if if you've got the level of fixing from your extra mana, ramping source, basically, then you've fixed your issue, which is being unable to cast some of the spells that are in your hand that you can't cast because you don't have enough of the mana symbols that you need, or of the mana sources that you need to cast the cards that have multiple mana symbols or different mana symbols from the lands that you actually have. So if somebody board wipes your wood elves after you've gotten your land, you're like, well, I don't care. I've gotten my land, so now I've got my colors, and I've still got my land. I've still got the amount of mana that I had before. I am not backwards in mana. I might be backwards in creatures and board state, but at least I still have the amount of mana that I can recover to, and perhaps do other things and still maintain my presence in the game or whatever. If you have a mana rock, and this is sort of a little bit true as well of mana dorks, and they get blown up, then you've lost that source of ramp, basically. You can't really, well, you can find some ways to get that source back, but if you have lands, if you ramp with lands, then you're just less likely to lose them. And that's why I find that, people should just run land-based ramp, or ways to find your lands so that you can at least play a land every single turn. Drawing a land and drawing another card is not the worst thing in the world, and that's why I think a lot of people underestimate Cultivate and Kadama's reach, and I think they are slightly overplayed and slightly, the most go-to cards of the format in green. But basically what they say is they ramp you one and also cantrip to draw you another card. Now that card is a land card, but it is drawing you another card, which means you will hit your land next turn. As well, it has also, quote unquote, in theory at least, thinned your deck from lands. So you are less likely to draw lands when you go to draw. So it's just a lot of little things that people need to think about, I think, when you're sort of going from, I don't know what you would call it, more of a unfocused deck or a precon deck into a more focused sort of casual deck. And like unfocused decks are still quote unquote casual decks. They are still roughly the same power level, but the level at which you can stay in the game and recover if you have lands is much, much greater than if you have mana dorks or mana rocks. So it's obvious that green is the most powerful in that form and in that space to be able to get more lands into play more quickly than any other color, basically. So how can other colors basically find ways in which to catch up? Now, there's a nifty card, or a couple of nifty cards that I want to talk about. And one of those cards is called Walking Atlas. It is a 2-mana, 1/1 artifact construct, and it says you may tap the Walking Atlas to put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So this basically says you may play an additional land as long as you tap it. So that allows you to get more lands onto the battlefield. I guess someone would say, well, the problem is therefore drawing lands, but there are lots and lots of ways in colorless decks to draw land cards in specific, and you're always going to draw a couple of lands at least in your first couple of turns of the game, so this is probably fine to run sort of card. There is another card that I think will be very beneficial and basically does the same thing. And that card is in fact a land itself, which is called Terrain Generator. It can tap to add 1 mana to your mana pool, 1 colorless mana, and then you can pay 2 mana and tap it to put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. So this basically does the same thing. It basically says you can play additional lands by paying 2 and tapping it, basically by paying 3. So that's fine, I think, as well. And again, like, there are so many ways to draw lands easily. There's a fairly recent card from Ikoria, which is called Thematic Compass, which is a 2-mana artifact. And you may pay 3 mana and search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And then it says also at the beginning of your end step, if you control 7 or more lands, you transform the compass into a land, which is basically a I can't remember what's the land's called. Is it Maze of Earth? Basically Maze of Earth. Yeah, basically Maze of Earth. Sorry, I couldn't think of it. It's terrible. But it taps for 1 mana and says untap target attacking creature an opponent controls and remove it from combat. So this just draws you additional lands. So basically, if you're in a non-green deck, I would 100% run this every single time. And even, even if you don't have other ways to take advantage of playing an additional land every turn, this will eventually turn into a land, and it will draw you a land every single turn, which is very, very good for non-green decks, because even though you might think to yourself, well, I'm running mono red and I don't want to hit a lot of lands. Well, no, of course you don't want to hit a lot of lands, but in the first few turns of the game, you really want to be able to hit your land drops so that you can curve out and make sure that you have enough mana to do multiple things on multiple turns. So you really, and again, this thins your deck, quote unquote. So this means that you are going to be less likely to draw more lands when you don't want to, but it also guarantees you to draw a land. And again, this is 3 mana to draw a card, essentially, but that card will be a land. But if you do it perhaps either at the end of somebody's turn or before your draw step, then essentially it's just drawing you an additional card, which, happens to be a land again. But there are just so many options out there nowadays, I think. It does depend on what color you're in, but there are so many options, especially colorless options out there. nowadays, and I think like Wizards has been doing a really good job. Recently, they've just spoiled a new card from Zendikar Rising. Actually, no, sorry, I got that wrong. It's from the new Commander set, which is a mono white creature, 4 mana, 3/4, human, not a human soldier. At the beginning of each end step, each opponent's end step, you if they control more creatures than you get a 1/1 white soldier creature token. And at the beginning of every end step, if a player controls more lands than you may search your library for a basic plains card, put it into the battlefield tap, then shuffle your library. There was also a fairly recent white card from the Commander decks, which allows you to look at the top card of your library and play it. Which is Verge Rages, which is a 3 mana 3/3 with first strike. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. As long as an opponent controls more lands than you may play lands from the top of your library. So Wizards has seen white and has been told over and over and over again how bad white is. So they've been paying attention to this. And it's great to see that there is some space. Now, this isn't great as what green has. Now, there's also another card, Cartographers Hawk, but it's pretty bad. It's a 2 mana, 2/1 flyer. When it deals combat damage to a player who controls more lands than you can return it to your hand. If you do, you can search your library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield tap, then shuffle your library. So it's sort of a 2 mana cultivate on a flying creature. But, yeah, look, but anyway, we won't get into it. But, like, there's just a lot more options nowadays. And again, I think Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan were the biggest sets for many artifacts and enchantments and things that sort of just give you an advantage for playing in colors that aren't green and giving you cards that basically transform into lands by meeting certain conditions. Now, of course, you have to meet those certain conditions, and some of them are much easier to meet than other conditions. But again, there's just other options for outside of green if you're not playing green. But if you're in green, it's sort of like, well, why are you playing these other things like signets and mana rocks? Like, you've just got other options, and it just baffles my mind as to why people just play these effects, and I just don't understand as to why. Well, I was mainly trying to talk about ramp in green, but I've sort of gone onto that tangent of talking about mana ramp and mana sources in other colors as well there. But it's certainly an important conversation to have as well, because the other colors need the ramp too. And of course you do have cards that are like rituals, especially in red. Black has one or two rituals, I think, but it also has cards like Cabal Coffers and other things like that that basically mean that you get more lands. And again, I was talking about Temple of the False God and Myriad Landscape in my previous video, and talking about why Temple of the False God might not be the best card in the world ever. But again, like, there are options for you now. Once again, it does depend on what colors you're in, if you're in mono white or mono red. And it also depends on how much budget you've got. But again, if you're running a green deck, I don't understand. I think it might be one of those things where some people just know, like, oh yeah, Cultivate Kadama's Reach, Rampant Growth. Those cards, those top 3 cards, and they don't really know any of the other cards that exist sort of a little bit more out there, and they're not really that willing to go out of their way, or maybe Farseek as well, but they're not really willing to go out of their way to find more cards that would go into their decks that you know would fit. So they just know, oh, Arcane Signet came out a year or two ago or whatever it was, and it came out in the Precon or in whatever Commander deck that I actually got this in. So it's just in there and it's just okay and it does what I want it to do. That's good enough. But I think that the debate should be open, and that's all I ever want to do with these sorts of things, is not poo-poo on anyone's decision that much if that's their decision in the end or whatever, but I just question it and go, are you sure? Why haven't you got something like this or something like that? You know, like, I think people need to be a bit more selective sometimes in their choices of cards, and I try to be very selective of choices of cards, so that I know that I'm not going to be stumbled, or if I am stumbled by playing, you know, the fact that I have Green Deck and I have Soul Ring, that's not that big of a deal. I just don't think that there's that big of a deal. And another reason why, not just board wipes or destruction of artifacts perhaps, or destruction of some of your mana dorks, but also there's things that are basically hate bears out there, and there's at least one in green that basically says artifacts cannot activate, which is Collector Oof. I don't know whether there's any other ones, but there are certainly many green effects that basically destroy all artifacts as well. So if you're running any artifacts, you can basically just blow up all your own artifacts and be like, oh, well, now I don't have my ramp source anymore. And if you're running Collector Oof and other things like this, you might not be running it in Commander, but you might, just to stop people from playing unfair things, I guess. But if you're playing it just to slow people down and not let them use their Mana Rocks, then I think that's a bit meh. Once again, if I don't think Mana Rocks, other people playing Mana Rocks, is that big of a deal. I think whatever somebody, you know, ramps into is more the problem than someone's Mana Rock. So I'll almost never destroy someone's Mana Rock or what have you, because basically that's what they need to be able to play the game with. And I always am of the opinion that I don't want to stop people from playing the game. I want people to have fun playing the game. But I don't want somebody else just to run away with the game and absolutely win the game. Or if somebody starts winning the game, you've got to be able to stop them, or you've just got to be able to be like, oh, well, I wasn't able to do very much in this game, so, you know, that's a feel-bad situation. But the thing is, you've just got to deal with it. But the thing is, if you can deal with a issue, then you should try to. You should try to make the game as fun for everyone as possible. And that's what I think, you know, people need to do. But anyway, that's probably another discussion for another day. But anyway, what do you guys think? Why the Flibble Flip? Do people run Mana Rocks in green decks? And, you know, perhaps as I sort of rambled on about some ramp-ish options or some ways to get advantages out of green, you know, why don't some people list some cards maybe that would help out non-green decks for those people? I'm always trying to find cards and trying to brew these decks to help new players so that they can get into the format and have a great time and not have to worry as much about how everything works, and you just basically have to play your cards as they come, more or less. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching and hope to see you again.